Hello, welcome to the Positive Posting Conversation, the show about how to have a better relationship with your dog and cat. I'm Zazie Todd, author of the books Bark, Wag and Purr, and creator of Companion Animal Psychology blog. My co-host, Christy Benson, is a dog trainer and anthropologist, and she also works at the Academy for Dog Trainers. We can't give advice on your pet, so if you have concerns, see your dog trainer, cat behaviourist, or veterinarian as appropriate. Thanks for joining us today. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Positive Post in Conversation. I'm Zazie Todd, and I'm delighted to say we've got a really interesting, thoughtful topic to talk about today because we're going to be talking about human remains detection dogs, and we've got two incredible guests to talk to us. So I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host, Christy Benson. Hello, Christy.
Morning.
And as well, we've got Kim Cooper and Kat Warren. So Kim Cooper is the owner and senior instructor at Best Friends Dog Training in Ottawa. She's been training dogs for over 35 years. She earned a degree in aerospace engineering from the Royal Military College, and she served for 14 years as an officer in the Air Force before making a non-traditional career move and becoming a professional dog trainer. Kim actively competes in obedience, agility, tracking, and other sports with her dogs, but her true passion is training search and rescue dogs. She has trained and handled 6 exceptional search and rescue dogs over the years, and she revels in the special partnership that exists between a working dog and its handler, and we're looking forward to hearing about that today. Some of her accomplishments, and she has a huge long list of accomplishments, but some of them include having certified 4 search and rescue dogs to OPP standards, something which only 20 dogs have ever achieved, and she coached some of those other ones too. And she's handled multiple dogs on what was at the time, and perhaps might still be, the deepest water find by dogs in Canada at 218 feet. So thank you, Kim, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And our other guest is Kat Warren. Kat is the author of the New York Times bestseller, What the Dog Knows, Scent, Science, and the Amazing Ways Dogs Perceive the World, which is published by Touchstone. And actually, we've had her on here before, and I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes at the end. What the Dog Knows was longlisted for the Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award, and she also wrote What the Dog Knows for Young Readers, which is published by Simon & Schuster for young readers. She's a retired professor from North Carolina State University, and she currently researches and writes about scent detection dogs and archaeology. She lives in Durham, North Carolina, with her husband David, a German Shepherd Rev, and a Boykin Spaniel called Brio. Hi, Kat. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Zazie and Christy and Kim. It's great to be on. I love this topic, so thanks for having us.
It's a really interesting topic, and I've got a first question which is going to go to both of you because I want to know how you got started working with search and rescue dogs and cadaver dogs. And so I'm going to put this to you, Kat, first, and then also to Kim.
Great. Well, I got started quite accidentally in the early 2000s with a dog where I was thinking that he was going to be an obedience dog, sort of a sport dog, and he was a singleton and was actually a dog aggressive or simply dog antisocial. And so part of my finding a way to work with him ended up via scent work. And I happened to have a trainer who had done this for many years and introduced me to what was then called cadaver dog work. We call it human remains detection more commonly now. And it was a wonderful transition because we had a canine team in Durham. Our Durham Police Department had a sergeant who was very interested and invested in having me as a volunteer train along with their canine team. So I did that for a number of years. And I do not have a dog that I'm deploying right now for lots of reasons, but my research has stayed in this area because I find it so rich and satisfying.
Mm-hmm. And such valuable work. Thank you. And Kim, how did you get into this?
I started over 30 years ago, just combined 2 things I loved, which was training dogs and being outside. And back then, there really wasn't such a thing as a cadaver dog or HRD dog. But as the first decade or so went along, we started to realize a lot of the time the civilian volunteers were getting called on searches later. And the searches at that point often didn't have the happy ending we might like them to have. and that we should perhaps be looking into this specialty as being necessary. So I started to cross-train my dogs to do both live and deceased. Had a couple of dogs in there who were specialized to just do human remains. And yeah, it's an incredibly compelling journey. I'm not sure if either of you have done scent work with dogs, but once you get started in it, you just get hooked. You can't stop. It's like the ultimate in teamwork, as opposed to so many things in dog training, which aren't about teamwork. They're more about you need to do what I tell you to do. Well, in scent work, it's I can't do the job without the dog, but the dog also can't do the job without me. So it's a real team.
One of the things that came to my mind when we decided to have you both on is that we have a lot of our listeners, and I think a lot of Zazzies and my colleagues are pet dog trainers. So they deal a lot with, not obedience in the way that I think we're talking about up till now with like competitive obedience, but like dogs who are jumping on grandma or behavior issues like dogs who are aggressive or really fearful or have, separation anxiety, something like that. So I don't actually have a good sense about how these dogs are trained. And I think I and our audience would be curious, a little bit nuts and boltsy about, what goes into training these dogs, because it seems like such a colossal task. So maybe I would be interested in hearing from both of you, not like the training plan, but, an insider's view to other dog pros, but just those pros who have a very different discipline. So Kat, maybe you can start on this one as well.
Well, I mean, very quickly, and I want to send it over to Kim, but, scent work is one of those things where you make finding a particular odor or set of odors valuable to the dog, right? And so when Kim talks about teamwork, it's that notion that most dogs are pretty good at using their noses. Some are better, right? So part of the training of this is just handling and timing and making it into the most fun game in the world, because human remains do not have a particular sort of pre-given emotional set for the dog, right? We impose a lot of that when people talk about, oh, does the dog grieve, right? And it's like if you're training the dog properly, the dog is doing the absolute opposite of grieving. The dog is going, oh my God, I have found this thing. And so I think that part of the specifics of this, and Kim can talk a little bit more, is that, the nose and training the odor is like one set of things, but all around it is a dog that's environmentally sound, who loves to work with you, who has where you are working in as a team and can recognize when a dog is in scent and working scent, as opposed to just going and literally finding the scent. And especially as we talk about the kind of work with burials where scent is more diffuse, right? Even a different set of challenges. So it's one of those things that not all dogs can be good at it. It's one of those things where people need to be really honest about the time commitment and the kind of dog that you need to do this. And I'll let Kim take it away because she has the kinds of dogs who can do this.
Yeah, I mean, at its root, it all starts with classically conditioning the dog to associate a particular odor with something of value. There's different ways we can do that classical conditioning or that imprinting process. Some people, for example, might put the target odor and some food side by side, so the dog just literally associates that if I go to where the odor is, I'm going to find food. Other people might take rolled up towels and sort of drench them in the scent and then play fetch with the dog. So as the dog's running out there to fetch his favorite toy, it also happens to have the odor, the desired odor. And that's the basis to just build the value for the odor. Then we have to, teach the dog what the indication is that we want. And it's all well and good to talk about this very clinically and very, like the recipe of making borscht. But underneath all of that is you've got to be injecting heart. The dog has got to want to do this with all his heart and all his soul so that you can count on him to do it under the most difficult conditions.
That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about commitment to odor, right? And that very term of a dog that has commitment to odor is such a huge part of this, and figuring out how to build that and maintain it. And, it's so easy to take a dog who's actually very enthusiastic about this and sour them by, pushing them too hard too soon, right? So there isn't one recipe, as Kim said, and there's 100 different ways you can train this, right? There's not like, but the end result has to be the same, is that you need a dog who is rock solid if you're going to deploy them. Even in these cases where they are not forensic cases, legal cases, where the stakes with burial grounds to me are as high as the stakes with some of the more commonly associated scent work tasks of finding the missing.
And I think it kind of blows my mind that dogs can still find these historic burial sites and maybe bring closure, or if not closure, at least answers or a different set of questions to people. And I know, Kat, you've been involved in some historic searches. So can you give us an example of one of the historic searches that you've been involved with?
Yeah, I mean, the one I'm sort of working with right now is one on a portion of Bureau of Land Management land in Maryland, where there was an abandoned farm/plantation, and finding the burial ground of where the enslaved might have been buried. Um, Using dogs and ground penetrating radar, but also, the dogs are such a small portion of this at some level, right? And I mean, dogs are a wonderful essential tool, but they are one small tool among many. So it really is maps, it's historical, it's oral history, people's memories. I know that for Kim's work, and she'll talk about this, I mean, it really is the memories of the people who are deeply involved and invested that help bring some of the understanding we have, right? So yeah, and so finding this area in the woods, which was literally cheek to jowl with the white family cemetery. And then what I'm doing now is actually working with the African American community there, of the descendant community, of um, finding the stories of the people. And we won't know who's specifically buried there. These are unmarked, and we're not going to disinter in these cases because it's actually unethical. And but the issue is to say, is there a way both to commemorate this and also to create a better understanding in the community of what has been lost, and needs to be reclaimed? Not necessarily just this space, this ground, but also the stories associated.
Yeah, I like that focus on what's been lost and what can be reclaimed. I think that shows just how important the work is, really.
Yeah, and I think the focus on telling people's stories is important too, and that resonates with my work. Because outside of my dog work, I am an anthropologist, and I work with a First Nation in the Northwest Territories in Canada. And something that is coming up, for my work is identifying Indigenous children that were in graveyards in residential schools. And Zazie asked for me to do like a really quick intro into residential schools in case some of our listeners aren't aware. If they're not Canadian, might not be aware. So there's this terrible chapter in Canada's history where we incarcerated children from First Nations and Inuit and Métis families in schools. They were removed from their families in terrible, violent ways. Many children died in these schools. They were very under-resourced by the government. Typically, they were associated with churches. And this isn't a chapter that has ended, and it's not something that's really far in the past. The school that closed the latest in the Gwich'in area where I work was in the mid-90s. So it's not, it's in my lifetime, and it continues to affect through this like generational trauma, the people who are alive today, even very young people. So setting that as the stage, we wanted to ask you, Kim, because we know that you have worked on the sites of residential schools where these young people, these children were buried after they were, essentially murdered through neglect or, other ways. So can you tell us a little bit about your work there? And just it's interesting to me because we may be looking to have dogs come out and help, the Gwich'in and just sort of your work in that domain.
Well, interestingly enough, we're heading up to the Northwest Territories next week to work at a site up there.
Okay.
Overall, in the last 3 years or so, we've worked at about 12 or 13 different Indian residential school sites. And, this whole field of using the dogs is pretty new. So we're working out policies, procedures, methodologies to make sure we're doing this as well as we possibly can. As Kat said, we're a tool and just one of several. And Christy, you can probably talk to this much more intelligently than I can. But the archaeological method seems to be about layering tools, to put multiple tools over the same site, collect information from each tool, and then the more tools that you have that seem to be pointing towards a positive one spot, the more sure you can be that that's exactly what you've got. A lot of these places do not get excavated, so the intent is not necessarily to excavate. It's like Kat said, it's to remember, it's to memorialize. So having the multi-tool approach is about the only way you're going to get increased confidence in your results.
Right, for sure.
Nobody's digging anything up. So yeah, we go out to the schools. We have our system that we employ as we go. We recommend that we bring in 3 dog teams when we go, as well as a data technician. And we'll run each one of the dogs over the search area separately. We don't watch each other work. We don't talk to each other. We relay our information back to our data technician who collates the results. So that way we're not influencing one another. Because a fancy way of calling a snippy dog, it's a biosensor. But at the end of the day, it's a dog. And if I pause and scratch my head and stub my toe in the sand, is my dog going to come over and have a closer look at that spot? Almost certainly.
Right.
We know we can have an impact on the dogs. We're running the 3 dogs all blind is our way to try and normalize any of those influences to the best of our abilities.
Right.
So this is really very important work, and it's also emotionally heavy work. And I imagine that sometimes it must be quite physically demanding as well, such as especially perhaps on the searches for people who are recently missing, who maybe you're running through woods or whatever after the dog. So what does it feel like? What's the emotional side of this like for the handler while you're working with the dog? And I'm going to put this to both of you, but probably to Kat first and then to Kim, please.
Well, Zazie, I still have very clear memories of all of this. And I will say that what my reaction, when I was working with the dog, was that I was so deeply focused on the dog and the dog being properly deployed and my being relaxed and not having my tension run down the lead, because certainly in high profile cases with homicide, it was inevitable, right? But having a dog that's resilient enough to just sort of flip its paw at you is like, I don't care about your feelings. I'm going to go do this. And the fact is that I think I've described it. We know that when people go in to do jobs and to do them right, they set aside certain kinds of emotions in order to do those jobs. And so there were certainly cases that were missing children cases, actually all of them in their own way, that would prey upon me in the days and weeks and months after a search. During the search, I think between adrenaline and that need to do as excellent a job as you can to help your dog do their best, sort of mitigated against sort of bringing all of that into the field. And I will say just briefly, and Kim has, I know, much experience with this, the same kinds of stakes happen with burial ground work. And perhaps there's less of a sense of urgency, but the people involved and the stakes that are involved with them, It's deeply emotional and deeply resonant. But once again, when the dogs are doing their work, I mean, they're so happy. And even when we had cases of missing people or whatever the thing is that when the dogs are actually working, it brings everybody up in some ways. It is. I mean, Kim said it's a joyous thing to watch, and once you're hooked on nose work and watching dogs do their thing, I think it helps. It helps bring the mood up for everybody, inevitably, as serious as it is.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, Kat said it very well. You invest so much time and effort into training to be a useful tool out there for whoever needs your services, that when the searches come up, well, they're sad circumstances. It's an opportunity to proof all that training that you put in to see, are we as good as we think we are? Are we up to this task? And uh, y- there is joy in working a dog. It's very contradictory, but we're often a little bit insulated from families as well, so we don't have a lot of that pain right in our faces. We're out in the woods. It is different with the historical work because we're actually immersed in the communities there.
Yes.
The survivors come out and watch us work, and that's we always worry about if my dog turns to the left and sits to scratch his ear. Have I got a whole bunch of people now going, oh, something's happening, when in fact nothing's happening? So we're trying to take care of them and make sure that they don't overreact to things that they might see happening. And at the same time, part of the historic work really is to take their stories back to our homes. So there is time spent listening to them and listening to what their lives were like in the residential schools. And I would say, honestly, I have had more emotional challenges doing the historic work than anything modern.
Yes. Yes. I'm in such agreement with Kim on this, and working on a burial ground in Richmond, and its history is so utterly tragic, and working with a descendant of that burial, and then working with the people whose great grandparents were enslaved in Maryland, and the resilience of the communities and the ingenuity of the communities, and all of that is always just coupled, because I'm doing genealogical work as well, and I'm going through old wills and finding these records of lists of enslaved people, and how much they cost and what lot number these folks were, is inevitably, I will be sitting at my computer with tears running down my face. And it's not my tragedy, but it also is my tragedy. This is what our country did, right? And there's a responsibility there that I think, um, as Kim said, it, it it's part of it, right? Inevitably, it's part of it. This is for us U.S. history, and a U.S. history that we still amazingly haven't grappled with, as we can sort of tell, because of our current situation, right? So all of those things, plus the dogs and the science and the scent work, and just to note quickly about Kim's work, that I remember, Kim, when you sort of first reached out just in a text going, how would we start this work? How would we do this work? And as she says, it is new. Folks over in Croatia are probably some of the founders of this work. A woman named Andrea Pintar and her husband Chris Nikolic, and an archaeologist there. But it is coming up. It is happening, and I think Kim and her team are some of the folks in Canada who are doing what I would say is sort of cutting edge work with combining dogs and archaeology. Just to brag on you, Kim. Sorry.
It has
sort
been
of
a
in a way leading to my next question, which is, sorry, go ahead, Kim. Did I interrupt you?
I was just going to say that it's been a fascinating couple of years to be there's literally nobody to ask questions of as we're trying to forge a path forwards, because the dog training world has not really been in this place before. So it's fascinating, it's exciting, it's challenging, and we just hope we're doing right by it.
I was going to say that somewhat leads into my next question, which is about how people approach us. I know my assumption is that none of us are members of the communities of the descendant communities, as you would say, Kat, of the graveyards that you're dealing with. So I'm curious about, how do communities reach out to you, or is just how do these projects actually get started?
Well, in our case, we've been reached out to in a number of ways. A lot of the communities are organizing their own search for unmarked graves. Some of them are hiring a contracting firm, such as an archaeological firm, to actually take care of their project management. There has been some government reach out at times. There has been development corporation reach out at different times. So we had a series of different employers as it is.
Right.
And each is very, very different. And one of the first ones we went on, it was dictated by court order that dogs had to be used on this particular site. And so we were brought in to do it. We were being followed by government, development corporation, and community members. And you knew that all three of those groups wanted a different outcome, which I'd never experienced in search and rescue before. In search and rescue, everybody wants you to find it. And here we knew we had people there who didn't want us to find anything. It was very different. It was very different.
Yeah, and I think, well, it's so interesting because, here in the United States, we were on the cusp of doing some really wonderful things at the federal level, because the National Park Service and Bureau of Land Management, and there was legislation coming through for burial ground research and work. All that has come to a halt. So I think it will be very interesting to see moving forward. As Kim says, sometimes there are other groups involved, right? So there are certainly people who have private land who have some interest in some of this work, right? But it's really so important that provincial and federal, right, or state or federal or even city people be involved with this, because it is expensive, right? And I'm not saying, many of us volunteer as much time and energy as we can, but for some of the equipment and, for ground penetrating radar studies and the people who are good at that, and to just pull together all of the research, it's enormously time consuming, and it's a process that shouldn't be rushed, right? We know how important it is that First Nations be able to, in a sense, be the drivers of what happens and when it happens, right? And all too often with things like development in the United States, the autonomy there is just incredibly limited. I think Canada is quite far ahead at this point of the United States in how to. We have our own boarding schools, and we've just barely begun to do work. And I expect it's not going to go forward for a few years right now.
Mm. And you've both just alluded to different groups of people who might be involved in these kinds of searches. And Kim, you gave an example where different people might actually want different outcomes. So what is it like working with the communities here? Are they ever wary of you coming in? Do they have disagreements amongst themselves? And if so, how do you handle that in a respectful way? Kim, we'll go to you first.
Sure. We've had almost nothing but positive experiences here. Most of the time, they're quite intrigued by the idea of bringing in an animal to help in the search, and it seems to fit with the culture better, that this is a natural way to make some forward progress. And we go through ceremony quite frequently, smudging ceremonies, paint, all those things to protect us. We get brushed down with eagle feathers at the end of the search to remove any evil spirits. And as I say, they tell us their stories, but at the same time, they seem quite concerned that we're okay at the end of our search work. They want to know that, they haven't burdened us too much with what they're going through. So we've had almost exclusively 100% positive. The only small exception to that, and it's very small, is some of the communities have had some bad experiences with people who are denying this history ever happened, and with press leaks and things like that. So some of the communities are a little closed in terms of opening up to strangers. But, I think once we get a chance to show that we have nothing but good intentions, they warm up really fast. They really do.
Lovely. I mean, I think that there are differences in the United States. Again, if we think about our history, the U.S. history with enslaved people and their relationship with dogs, um, it is it is much more problematic. And so, in some of the communities where I've been involved, the difference between say, a Labrador versus a pointy-eared Malinois or German Shepherd, right? Where the U.S. has used these dogs to terrorize people, right? Law enforcement has misused these dogs, right? And so part of this can end up being a process of it not feeling, I mean, as Kim says, is sort of this is part of the natural world in bringing in a dog for some poor African American communities. It's scary and disrespectful, right? And so again, that issue of how important it is that when you bring the dogs in, that these not be dogs that do what we call an aggressive alert, right? Pawing or digging at the ground, that these are not dogs that lift their leg during a search if we have community members out. I mean, there's a whole set of things that we wouldn't have to worry about quite as much, right? Without having people who are looking at the work. But in a way, it's also these are the best practices, right? We've moved away, thank goodness, from things like it being acceptable that a dog dig enthusiastically when it has located something, right? And if you're on a burial ground and you have people watching, as Kim said, it is really important that you have these dogs that do these nice quiet alerts or a bark or whatever. That that's a long way to go around, but people need to appreciate this history, and I think that it's a two-way education, because I think that handlers that have had human remains detection dogs where they've mostly worked in law enforcement or with law enforcement and are enthusiastic about this kind of work, there's also a learning curve, right? Because it is very different work, and that willingness to sort of take in that part of our history and everything else in doing this work ends up that handlers are learning some very different skills than they might have had working uniquely with law enforcement.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I could fully see that unfold in my mind as you were saying that. Sure. I know, Kat, you mentioned this already, so I know you do bring in historical documentation to your work. But I guess the general question is, do you rely, or, how do you work with oral history? Kim, probably you also, work with oral history because you're talking to community members, and I'm assuming elders were there with you. Kat, so we're curious about how do you bring that into your work, and what do you do with that?
I mean, oral histories are not just about there's a burial ground here, right? The oral histories are this this is what I know, right? And very often, for instance, I've been having conversations with three older men in their 80s whose grandfathers were fishermen on the Potomac. And the connection between their history of their grandfathers being fishermen on the Potomac, that the great grandfathers who were enslaved, that was one of their sort of early jobs, both during enslavement and right after emancipation. And so that issue of saying there's a continuity here. It's not just about going back and saying, tell me about what you know about your great grandfather who was enslaved. It really is this whole history of resilience and skills and what kind of future came out of this person who was enslaved, who was there against their will. And in some ways, so those histories become very long and very complicated, and in a sense have very little to do about the space where they might be buried, as opposed to that larger context, right?
Yeah, for us, we're just dog handlers, and all the ologists out there, the archaeologists, the anthropologists, they do the oral history, they do the collection, and then they just tell us where to search. In the interest of good dog handling, we actually don't really want to know why they want a particular area searched, because again, that might skew how we handle the dog. If they say, "Oh, we've got stories of 12 bodies buried here," well, I'm going to go over that ground 17 times till I find at least one of them. Whereas if nobody tells me there's anything there, I'll go at it as I should, in a very unbiased way. We do get the oral histories when we're sitting around having coffee during a break. They tell us some of the stories. And about the only other way we hear about it is if we do, come back with a report and say, yeah, we've got the dogs indicating in this spot over here. It's going in the report. It's a fait accompli. Now will you tell us why you had a search there? And then, we'll get, yeah, we have several stories from survivors who said that they figured there was a couple of burials over there.
Mm.
Let me
Thank
add
you.
just one thing to that, because I think it's so incredibly important that one of the reasons that dogs are so helpful is that they're a way to narrow down areas, because things like ground penetrating radar are sometimes difficult and it's time consumptive to clear areas enough, and sometimes those areas can't be cleared. And it's not that the dogs are putting their noses directly over a possible burial. That's probably not usually where the scent may be the strongest, but the dogs are great at sort of helping define an area where you then can bring in additional tools, right? So it is that idea. Kim talked about layers, and it's that idea of all of these different mapping systems and the dogs and ground penetrating radar and sometimes LIDAR that help create a three-dimensional picture of what's there.
Mm. I am really feeling the weight of colonial history at the moment, especially as a Brit as well as Canadian. But I think so the dogs play a really important role in these searches, and they play a special role that only a dog could do. So I'm thinking about what kind of dog is suitable for this, because one time, this is the only time I've ever really been to a nosework class. I went as a volunteer with a Malinois who was at the shelter, who was not coping with shelter at all, did amazingly well at the nosework class, and staff arranged for them actually to be transferred out to see if they could become a scent detection dog. And I don't know the outcome, but that was a good thing for the dog that happened. So we think of this kind of breed. You mentioned Malinois and German Shepherds and Labradors. What kind of dog is good for this work, and where do you get them from?
Kim, take it away first. You have your prejudices, I have to say.
I have very strong prejudices towards pointy-eared dogs myself. Yes. But it's more about the characteristics that you need in the dog. So they have to have, well, I'll tell you, a really good search dog, what we are doing in training that dog is we are capturing and capitalizing on a mental health problem that they have, which is OCD. They need to be absolutely obsessed with a toy or a reward system. Whatever our reward system is, they have to be just anytime, any day or night, any day of the week, I'm ready for that reward. And so the drive to get the reward has got to be high. Then there's got to be a hunt drive which, and as you know, the drive theory is just words, but basically it's a dog who almost can't stop itself from hunting. It's in its nature to be constantly snuffling around and looking at stuff. But you can have snuffly dogs, like say beagles, who aren't interested in playing ball, for example. So you cannot capture that drive because the dog does it for himself and not for the ball. So we need to have that balance that, yes, you want to sniff, but you want to sniff for me and for what I have in my pocket. And then on top of that, you have to look at physical characteristics. They have to be fit, healthy, able to move around easily in more challenging terrain. I personally like a dog about 50 pounds because if I have to pick it up, I can. The big 100-pound shepherd, I don't see the value in the extra 50 pounds myself. And so I'm looking for something a little bit more compact. And then finally, the temperament on these guys has got to be incredibly solid. People neutral or people friendly. And I mean, the travel we put these guys through is crazy. And they have to be able to get off of the ATV, get out of the airplane and go to work right away. They have to become just so adaptable to all kinds of different things. And a lot of that's socialization and training, but some of it is the character the dog arrives with.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this is really fun because I had shepherds for years and then I downsized. I got a Boykin Spaniel. And he's 40 pounds and is a brilliant hunter. I mean, he sadly has a bad hip and a bad knee, genetics, right? And so I had to make the decision that I was not going to train him for a historic human remains detection, as much as that disappointed me. However, he is like winning placements in nosework trials because he comes out and is ready to work. And like Kim said, he brings all the characteristics that something like a Dutchie, a well-bred Dutchie, well-trained Dutchie, or a Malinois would bring. He's a little hunter. He's a little hunting machine, but has that same desire to communicate at the end, right? And all of these dogs, they may start out going, I'm going to do this for the ball. All of them get an inherent pleasure out of the act of hunting, right? That is part of it. It is like the border collie that herds. The border collie is not waiting for a treat at the end or a ball. The dog is being driven by that. And I think that's the nice part, that you're capturing both of those things with scent detection dogs. And it's also a reminder to people who have pet dogs, who are sort of interested in the scent detection world, is that it is a sort of a deeply satisfying sport, activity for your dog to do. And it is why reactive dogs, et cetera, can sort of find their place in the world with these kinds of sports, because it satisfies them, right? They think less about being worried about environment.
And we all love looking at pictures of Braille, so on Facebook. He's just so cute. I kind of want to eat him.
He is like a little. I have not ever had a push button dog. That dog is a little push button dog. He's just right, and it's true that there's a level at which I want to go, oh yeah, but I want a layered, complicated German Shepherd, and then I go, fine with just a waggly tail, right? And the Spaniels and the Labradors, but especially the Spaniels, are much more common in Europe as scent detection dogs and human remains detection dogs than they are here. And I think that there's a good reason for that. It's a very different kind of dog, but it's equally as devoted to these tasks.
Yeah, and sometimes I have this discussion with my wife because we have kind of separate dogs. We have our dogs, but they're sort of, especially when they're bad, they're your dog. Her dog is a spaniel crossed with a cattle dog, and I think she would be great. Yeah.
Oh my God.
But like she's ridiculously adorable. She's the right size. She's very she would chase a stick for 70 years straight. Like she But then the dog who's recently kind of become a little bit more I'm not sure how this happened because it's definitely her dog, but it's sort of become my dog, is like a 150-pound livestock guardian dog that we have for ravens.
Oh.
And he's not any of these qualities. He doesn't care about food even, really. He can feed himself with chicken food. Like, he hangs with the chickens. He's like, I need you not. And I'm like, how could I could set out, what opportunity could I give him? Barking at everything? Like, I could be like, no barking until you do X, Y, Z. So, but it would be hilarious to me in my mind. I see, like, what if I went to like one of these, courses or something where you go to see people and I have my livestock guardian dog. Here I am. Okay, anyway, sorry. Which brings us, not really, but sort of in a roundabout way, to our next question, our final question, which is a typical training journey for a dog. So to get a dog, these dogs that you have who are, ready to do this work at the historic graveyards, what's their training journey look like? Is it a couple of months? Is it a couple of years? Is it how many wash out? Like, just sort of, again, back for our audience, who I think has a lot of pet dog trainers and might be curious about this. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's probably one of the most complicated training journeys I can think of to do this. Because when you train a dog to find wintergreen or find your dropped cheese or whatever, in the beginning, you put out the thing to be found. You know exactly where it is. And then you can simply praise and coach your dog as he's doing the right behaviors at the odor source. When it comes to training the historic dogs, we train in graveyards a lot. And we don't actually know where the odor is as the handler, as the trainer, as the coach. I don't know where the odor is. I can't just start training the dog in a graveyard and assume that everything he does is correct. I'm going to create a dog who's looking for mushrooms. I could do that really easily. So our belief, I say our belief, our team's belief, is that the dog needs to get trained as a run-of-the-mill cadaver dog to start with. He has to be convinced he can find things. So that he keeps looking. He has to learn how to give his indication, how to let his handler know that it's good. And then we'll start bringing them into the graveyard. But as I say, once we're in the graveyard, we still don't know where the odor is. And we could really mess up the dog's training by incorrectly marking or rewarding something that actually isn't there. So we never train alone. We train in a pack. We bring all of our dogs, many of our dogs out as we can, and we will run the most experienced dogs first so that they will let us know where the odor is on that day. And then we can bring in the junior dogs and we can feel better about any kind of mark reward system we're using with them, that we're probably rewarding the right thing. So it's way more challenging than anything I've ever done before. And I can't imagine how a single person with a dog could do this well on their own. I really think it needs a team. I think you need a team to do this well.
Yeah. I mean, I agree completely with Kim. And, just to add a little fillip of complication to this, when Kim said, running the dogs, the scent can be very different in a burial ground from the AM and 7 a.m. as opposed to 5 p.m. The scent can move into completely different areas, right? And so you have all of these unknowns. And then again, I think that people who are interested in this is not a replacement for standard human remains detection dog work. This needs to be a kind of ideally an additive thing, because the dogs need to work in a kind of different way, right? Just as when you train a dog to detect on water, you're working with the same scent to some degree, but it's a very different system of how the dog can communicate with you, and teaching them. I think that Andrea Pintar works on genocide cases, right, in Europe, and also on old archaeological sites as well. But when you're looking at that kind of work, they are doing grids in farmers' fields with the dogs on long lead, drones overhead, right? I mean, it is a enormously demanding. And so as Kim said, there's no typical journey. The last question is, do dogs wash out? The answer to that is more dogs should wash out. Okay. It is all sorts of things that can happen, right? But one of the things that needs to happen in cases of working with cadaver dogs is that these dogs need to be at the top of their game because the stakes are high, and not being honest about your abilities and your dog's abilities because you love doing this work won't cut it. I don't want to end on that. You'll ask us a nicer final question, but I think it's really important.
We're actually going to move on to the book section, and we're going to get your book recommendations. And I want to say to anyone who is listening, I mentioned Kat's book in her introduction, What the Dog Knows, Science and the Amazing Ways Dogs Perceive the World. This is honestly one of my absolute favorite dog books. It's wonderful. It will tell you more about the things that we've been talking about today. So if you want to know more, get that. It's absolutely beautifully written. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And we also have a recording with Kat talking about it, which I will put in the show notes as well, so you can listen to her on that. So make sure you get that book and read it. And it's been really wonderful to listen to you both. So interesting to listen to you both talking about this work, but we have to move on. So I'm going to ask each of you and then Christy for a book recommendation to tell us about something that you've been reading recently that you have really enjoyed. And Kim, we'll start with you, please.
Sure. So this is not so much a book that's come out recently, but it is absolutely my favorite dog book of all time. It's by Brian Hare. It's called The Genius of Dogs. And it's all about interesting questions about canine cognition and how they think, how they problem solve, what their strength is in terms of their intelligence, as we tend to judge them based on human intelligence. And he puts it in a different light and shows that their genius is in other areas. Yeah, they don't do math, but they do some other things exceptionally well.
Great choice.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Kat. What book are you going to recommend to us?
So I was thrilled that this is Native Nations by Kathleen Duvall, and I was delighted that she just won the History Pulitzer for this book. This is a millennium of Native history in the United States, and it is really brilliant, and it has to do with research that I've been working on for the past several years on the Mississippian and woodland cultures in southeastern United States. But it is a rich, brilliant book. So I highly recommend it. It's really comprehensive. Somebody used the term magisterial, which I just sort of really love that term. But I'm learning so much as I go through it.
Great. Thank you. Sounds like a great read. Christy, what are you reading?
So I just started a new book. I'd had a couple of friends recommend Ursula Le Guin. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see that. And as an author, but when I went and looked at her books, I had no interest in any of them. But I found myself interested in her life and her writing. I was like meta interested about what it sounded to me like she was a really interesting person. So I downloaded this. It's called Words Are My Matter: Writings on Life and Books by Ursula Le Guin. So it's more of her talking about books and writing and life rather than her storytelling. But so that I just loaded it, so I don't actually have any good sense of what it's going to be like. But that's what I'm reading right now.
I got to meet her. I got to meet her and spend time with her. And
oh wow,
yes, she's just such an amazing human being. Gone now, but it really was one of those brushes with fame that I still remember.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, so that sounds great. Mine is Vanishing Treasures. It's a bestiary of extraordinary endangered animals by Catherine Rundle. And it is actually lots of little short chapters about 23 different animals and how amazing they are. And it's not just or only a natural history of them, it's also the history of them as seen through people. So she goes back to like what the ancient Greeks said about this animal, or what Russian fairy tales say about the wolf and things like that. So it's really, really interesting, and it's awe-inspiring because they're amazing animals. And the reason that I actually picked it up, it was on display at my bookstore, and I looked through and I thought, I hope they've got the hedgehog. And they had the hedgehog in here because I love hedgehogs.
Yay!
I call them Hochi Witchy because of my ancestry. And she even has in here mentioned that Romani people used to cook and eat Hochi Witchy. So I was really interested to read that. And at the very end, like, it's kind of amazing and awe-inspiring, and then depressing because all of these animals are endangered. And so at the very end, she's added a note that reminds us to do something about this. So to vote for people who will do something about climate change, not to invest money if we've got money to invest, not to invest it in fossil fuels, to make sure that we do things that will help. And above all, don't make the mistake of thinking it's too late. So I guess the hope is that all of these animals can be saved. And it would make a great gift, I think, this book, for lots of people.
That's great.
So thank you, Kat and Kim, for joining us and for such a fascinating conversation. If people want to know more about you, what's your website? Where can they go? Kim, where should they go to find out more about you?
Well, our team website, we are the Ottawa Valley Search and Rescue Dog Association. So that Google's nice and easy and take you to our website.
Perfect. Thank you, Kat.
Great. And I'm catwarren.com. I'm not sure. It's a little out of date. Not terribly out of date, but you can get excerpts from the book and things like that on the site. So yes. And thank you for having us. And Kim, I so appreciate your coming on. And the work that's being done in Canada is awe-inspiring.
Yeah, it is. And I think we really appreciate both of you making the time to come and talk to us. And thank you to everybody who's listening. Please make sure that you subscribe to make sure that you're the first to get future episodes. And given that I mentioned hedgehogs, I'm going to end on a phrase which I rarely get the opportunity to say. And before I say it, I have to say this is figurative, not literal these days. May you always have a big fat Hochi Witchy in your mooey. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Positive Posting Conversation. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the show and write us a review via your podcast app. For the show notes, visit companionanimalpsychology.com. This show was produced by Zazie Todd. The music is Melody from Paris by Studio Le Bus. See you next time.